She told him one lie to survive, but that lie led her straight to a man hiding a secret far more dangerous than hers. 6 months pregnant, freezing on a stranger's porch, and the giant, scarred rancher standing before her. He just watched his wife and daughter burn alive 3 years ago. She needed a home. He needed a reason to live. But someone powerful wants them both destroyed. And before this story ends, one of them will have to choose: run or fight back. This is Ellie's story. Stay until the end, because what happens next will break your heart and put it back together again. This story will remind you of one powerful truth: broken people can still build beautiful things. Your past does not define your future. And sometimes the biggest lies lead us to the most honest love. If you have ever felt like starting over was impossible, Ellie and Jonas will show you that courage is not about being fearless. It is about being terrified and moving forward anyway. Now, before we begin this journey together, do me a small favor. Hit that subscribe button so you do not miss what happens next. And drop a comment below telling me where you are watching from tonight. I read every single one, and I love knowing this story is traveling the world with you. All right, let's get into it. The stagecoach had been stopped for 3 hours. Ellie pressed her hand to the frozen glass, her breath making clouds in the air. Beside her, 5-year-old Hank trembled. He curled into his mother, trying to make himself small. "Mama," he whispered, "I am cold." "I know, sweet boy." She wrapped her thin shawl around them both. "We are almost there." But she was lying again. She had no idea where there was. The driver's voice broke the quiet. "Silver Fall Station." "This is the end of the line, ma'am." Ellie's heart froze. She was not ready for this. Hank pulled on her sleeve. "Is this where the man from the letters lives?" he asked. "Yes, honey." "Will he be a nice man?" Ellie thought about the letters she wrote to Jonas Blackwood. She had called herself a widow with no children. She was so afraid the truth felt like something she just could not afford. Now that truth was kicking inside her, with nowhere to hide. "I do not know," she said, "but we are about to find out." The cold hit her like a punch when the door opened. Wyoming winter was a whole different animal. This cold felt like it wanted to bite right through you. Ellie stepped down, holding her belly with one hand and Hank's small hand with the other. The station was a simple wooden building with smoke puffing from the chimney. And standing away from the others was a man who had to be Jonas Blackwood. He was a mountain, taller than any man she had ever seen, with shoulders so wide they blocked the sky. A dark beard hid his jaw, but she could see the scar from 20 feet away. It was a pale, twisted line that ran from his collar right up into his hair. His gray eyes locked on hers. They looked like the winter sky. They looked like they had seen things burn. Hank clutched her dress. "He is big, Mama." "I know he is, baby." Jonas Blackwood started walking toward them. His boots made a crunching sound in the snow with each heavy step. He stopped about 3 feet away from them. "Mrs. Hartwell." His voice was low and deep, like thunder far off in the distance. "Mr. Blackwood." Her own voice was steady, which felt like a miracle. "Yes, I am Eleanor Hartwell." His eyes went from her face down to the little boy hiding behind her. Then his gaze dropped lower to her round belly, plain as day under her thin wool dress. The silence felt tight and ready to snap. "The letters," Jonas said, his voice slow. "You wrote that you were a widow. No children." Ellie's throat felt like it was closing up. This was the moment she had been dreading for 3,000 miles. "I lied," she said. The words dropped into the cold air. "This is my son, Hank. He is 5. She pushed the boy forward just a little. "And I am?" She put a hand on her belly. 6 months along." Jonas Blackwood's face was like stone. "And your husband?" This was the hardest part, the truth that would make any good person turn her away. "I am not a widow," she said, the words ragged. "My husband left me. He ran off when he learned about the baby. I told people he died because I could not stand the shame." Her voice broke. "I am so sorry. I know I have no right, but if we could just stay one night, I will be gone in the morning." He looked at her for a long time. Then he did something she never expected. He crouched down right in the snow to look her son in the eye. The movement was graceful for such a big man. "Henry," he said softly, "are you cold?" Hank just nodded, his eyes wide. Do you like horses? Hank nodded again. I have 17 horses back at my ranch. If you help me care for them, I will teach you how to ride one come spring. Does that sound fair? Hank looked up at his mother, not sure what to do. Ellie could barely breathe. Go on, she whispered. Answer the man. Yes, sir, Hank said in a small voice. That sounds fair. Jonas stood up. His gray eyes met Ellie's, and she saw something in them besides ice. She saw a man who was hurt and tired. I am not going to pretend I am not surprised, he said, and the lying bothers me. It does. Ellie braced herself. But I put that advertisement in the paper because I need a wife. I have my own reasons for wanting a family. He stepped a little closer. You lied because you were scared and had nowhere else to turn. I understand that more than you know. I have done things I am not proud of. His voice got lower. So I am not the man to judge you. Mr. Blackwood, she started. Jonas, he corrected her gently. If we are going to do this, you call me Jonas. She tried the name. Jonas, I do not understand. It is simple, he said with a shrug of his huge shoulders. The boy needs a home. You need a home. The baby will need a home. And I have a home. Tears started to burn Ellie's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had not cried when her husband left or when she lost her room. She would not cry now. What? The word came out as a whisper. Why would you do this for me? Jonas was quiet for a moment. 3 years ago, he said, I lost my wife and my daughter in a fire. I could not save them. I just had to stand there and watch. Ellie gasped. Ever since this house has been empty, your letter felt like, well, it felt like a second chance, a chance to do it right, to protect a family instead of failing one. He reached out his hand, slow and careful. It was a rough, calloused hand, but it was warm. He took hers. I am not asking you to love me, Ellie, Jonas said. I am not even asking you to trust me yet. I am just asking you to let me try. Let me give you and your children a real home. Ellie looked at his large, scarred hand holding her small, trembling one. And if I fail? She whispered. If I disappoint you again? A small smile touched his mouth. Then we will figure it out together. I reckon that is what families are supposed to do. The wagon ride to the ranch took 4 long hours. Hank fell asleep, leaning against Jonas's side. Ellie watched the man next to her, the man who was nothing like she expected. He was gentle with the horses, speaking to them in a low, calm voice. When Hank got tired, Jonas just lifted the boy onto his lap and let him sleep there. He does not normally take to strangers, Ellie said quietly. Jonas kept his eyes on the trail. Kids know, he said. They can tell when someone means them harm, and when they do not. He was telling her that he would not hurt them. He was telling her they were safe. I'm telling you, that boy's got a good gut feeling about people. You ought to trust it. The road ahead cut a path through hills buried deep in snow. It was the kind of beautiful that could turn on you in a heartbeat. Ellie finally worked up the nerve to ask about the fire. Was it an accident? The silence in the wagon was heavy enough to feel. No, Jonas finally said, his voice low and steady. It was not. When she asked who did it, he just shook his head. Not yet, Ellie. It's a long road. We'll get to the old ghost later. Let's just focus on getting home. The word felt strange but warm inside her chest. She had not had a real home since she was a little girl, safe on her mother's lap. She had to wonder if she could ever feel that way again, out here in this frozen land with this quiet, scarred man. But for the first time in what felt like forever, she truly wanted to find out. As the sun began to dip low, casting long purple shadows, Blackwood Creek Ranch came into view. It was a big place with a 2-story log house pressed against a bluff and smoke curling from its chimneys. A huge barn stood nearby, but her eyes landed on 2 simple wooden crosses off to the side of the house. Her hand flew to her mouth. Jonas followed her gaze, his jaw set like stone. Martha and Lily, he said, his voice rough with pain. My wife and my daughter. Lily was just 3. He shook his head. I built this whole place for them. They never got to see it finished. Jonas, I am so sorry. That was 3 years ago, he said, his voice carefully level. Some days it feels just like yesterday. On other days, it feels like a whole other lifetime. When the wagon stopped, the front door opened and an old man stepped out, moving slow and stiff like his joints were complaining. He was lean and weathered, with sharp eyes that saw everything, and one of his sleeves was pinned up where an arm used to be. "About damn time," the old man called out. "I was starting to think you'd gone and frozen solid out there." Then he saw Ellie and Hank, and his grumpy face changed. "Well, I'll be. You actually went and did it. Brought home a wife." "Ellie, this here is Ezra Thorne," Jonas said, helping her down from the wagon. "He's worked this land longer than I've been alive and thinks it gives him the right to run my life." "Somebody's got to," Ezra stomped over, looking Ellie up and down. "You're prettier than your photograph, ma'am." "Mr. Thorne." "Ezra," he corrected, "and I mean it. That picture did not do you justice." His eyes then dropped to her belly and got wide. "Jonas, you failed to mention—" "I did not know," Jonas said quietly. Ezra took in this news without missing a beat. "Well, that changes things, I suppose. Changes them for the better." Ellie braced herself for judgment, but instead Ezra broke into a wide, gap-toothed grin. "This old ranch needs the sound of children's laughter. It has been as quiet as a graveyard for far too long." He turned to Hank, who was watching with big eyes. "And who is this young man? What is your name, son?" "Henry," Hank stuttered, nervous, "but my mama calls me Hank." "Hank, that is a good, strong name. You like apple pie, Hank?" The boy gave a small nod. "Good, because I made one this morning, and I sure could use some help eating it. You think you are up for that job?" Hank's fearful face transformed into a hopeful, excited smile. "Yes, sir." "Then let's get you inside before you turn into an icicle." Ezra offered his one good hand. "Come on, I will show you around while these two grown-ups handle the boring business." Ellie nodded, her throat tight, as she watched her shy, scared son take the old man's hand and walk into that warm house without a single look back. "Ezra lost his arm at Antietam," Jonas said quietly. "Lost his wife to a fever a year later. He understands what it is to start over. It seems like everyone out here does." "Wyoming has a way of attracting broken people," Jonas said, lifting their bags. "We come here to hide from the world, or to heal from it. Sometimes both." He looked at her. "I am still figuring out which one I am." In the fading light, as snow began to fall, Ellie knew she had to tell him. "I need to tell you why I really left Philadelphia. It was not just because Walter left me." Jonas waited. "His family, they are very wealthy, very powerful people. They blame me for him leaving. They threatened to take Hank from me. They said a woman who could not keep her husband was not fit to raise her bone." The words came out in a rush. "That is why I ran. I could not let them take my son." Jonas set down the bags right there in the snow. "Anyone comes looking for that boy," he said slowly, "they will have to go through me first. You cannot promise that. You do not know what they are capable of." "I know what I am capable of." His gray eyes were like chips of steel. "And I give you my word, Ellie. No one is taking your son, not as long as I am breathing." For the first time, she believed a man's promise. "Thank you," she whispered. "Do not thank me yet," he said, picking up the bags. "We have a long winter ahead. Come inside. You need to eat and rest. That baby is not going to wait." The inside of the house was simple and solid, and warmer than she could have hoped, with two big fireplaces roaring. But it was the woman's touches that caught her eye. A vase of dried wildflowers on the mantel, a soft shawl draped over a rocking chair. "Martha's things," Jonas said, following her gaze. "They are still here after 3 years. I could not bring myself to move them. But if they bother you—" "No," Ellie said, her fingers tracing the wool of the shawl. "They should stay. This was her home. She should be remembered." She saw something like gratitude in his eyes. "Ezra got the guest room ready for you and the boy. I will take the room down the hall." He cleared his throat. "I am not expecting anything from you, Ellie. We are married on paper. That does not mean— well, I hope you understand." He stepped a little closer. "I need you to understand. Whatever we build here, it has to be real, not just convenient. I will not have you sharing my bed out of some sense of duty. If that ever happens, it will be because you want it to happen, Not because you think you owe me. Ellie could feel her cheeks flush. No man had ever spoken to her with such respect. Walter had only ever taken what he wanted. You are not like any man I have ever met, Jonas, she said. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I do not know yet, she admitted with a small smile. Ask me again in the spring. Later that night, after Hank was asleep in a warm bed, Ellie sat by the main room fire. The house was quiet. She placed a hand on her belly and felt the baby give a little kick. We made it, she whispered. I do not know what comes next, but we made it. The front door opened with a gust of wind, and Jonas came in, stomping the snow off his boots. The horses are settled, he said. This storm is getting worse. We will not be going anywhere for a few days. Is that bad? Not unless you mind being stuck here with me. He sat in the chair across from her. You should know something about me, Ellie, about this town. The people in Silver Falls. They do not trust me. Some of them, they hate me. His jaw was tight. 3 years ago, after the fire, I found the man who said it, a drifter named Silas Crawford. He was paid to do it, paid to kill my family. Ellie's breath caught in her throat. I tracked him, Jonas said, staring into the flames, and I killed him. I beat him to death with my bare hands while he begged for his life. The fire popped in the dead quiet. They called it self-defense at the trial. The jury let me go. His voice dropped to a low whisper, but everybody around here knows the truth. Let's be clear about this. I killed that man because I wanted him gone. I couldn't save my Martha and Lily, but I could sure as hell make someone pay for what they did. Jonas finally looked her in the eye, and the hurt in his gaze was a thing to behold. I'm not asking you to forgive me, Ellie. I'm telling you because you've got a right to know the kind of man you're with. I'm a killer. The law may say I'm clear, but God knows the truth. If you want to take your boy and go, I'll give you enough to start fresh. No hard feelings. The quiet in the room was heavy. Ellie thought about Walter and his slick smiles and empty words. She thought about her own father, who sold her off like cattle and called it a wedding. She thought about this scarred, honest man offering her a way out. The man who hurt your family, she said, her voice low. He had it coming. Jonas winced at her words. I'm not saying it was right, and I'm not saying I ain't scared. She leaned in closer. But I'm not running, not today, not tomorrow. You know why? Because you told me. Walter never told me the truth about a single thing. He lied about money, he lied about other women, and he lied about loving me. You just told me the worst thing you ever did, and then you offered to set me free. That don't make me a good man, Ellie. Maybe not, but it makes you an honest one. She stood up, her hand on her back, and that's more than I've ever known. She walked to her room, then stopped. Jonas? Yeah, that man who paid Silas Crawford to start the fire. Did you find him? The silence was all the answer she needed. Not yet, Jonas said, but I will. He didn't have to say the rest. She fell asleep that night with a killer down the hall, and somehow felt safer than she had in years. She dreamed of fire, but it was her own. She was back in Philadelphia, in that little apartment. Walter stood in the door, laughing as the flames climbed the walls. You can't run from me, he sneered. Hank screamed. Ellie tried to reach for him, but her body was frozen. The smoke choked her. Mama. She woke up fighting the sheets, her heart hammering. Mama. Hank's voice was real. He stood by her bed, just a pale shape in the dark. You were making scary sounds. I'm sorry, sweet boy. She pulled him in beside her. Just a bad dream. Go on back to sleep. I don't want to go back to Philadelphia. His little voice shook. I don't want him to find us. She held him tight. He won't. We're safe now. I promise. She thought of Jonas, of his quiet, terrible strength. That first week at Blackwood Creek Ranch was a hard lesson. Life out here wasn't like the books she'd read. There was nothing romantic about hauling water with frozen fingers or scrubbing pots till her hands bled. The big wood stove seemed to have a mind of its own, either filling the kitchen with smoke or going cold for no reason. But she wouldn't quit. You're going to work yourself into the ground, Ezra said on the third day, watching her wrestle a bucket. Let me get that. I can manage. I know you can, but you'll still wear yourself out. He lifted the bucket with his one good arm like it was nothing. Pride is a fine thing, Ms. Blackwood, but it won't keep you warm. Ms. Blackwood. The name still felt like a stranger's coat. I'm not proud, Ellie said. I'm scared. Scared of what? Of being useless? Jonas took us in. I have to earn my keep. You think that's what this is? Ezra set the bucket down and faced her. Listen to me. Jonas didn't bring you here because he needed a hired hand. He brought you here because he needed a family. There's a big difference, is there? Hell yes, his rough face went soft. You want to know why he answered your letter? Why he reached out after 3 years of hiding from the world? Ellie just nodded. Because he was dying. Not his body, but his soul. Every day I watched a little more of him just fade. He wasn't eating, wasn't sleeping. That fire took more than his wife and child. It took his will to live. But now Ezra smiled a little. Now he's got you, that boy, and the one on the way. You ain't a burden, Ms. Blackwood. You're the reason he's fighting again. That night, Ellie made a meal you could actually eat. Just beans, cornbread, and salt pork. But Jonas cleaned his plate. This is good, he said, his voice quiet. You don't have to say that. I ain't lying. He looked at her, and for a second, there was a warmth in his gray eyes. It's good. Hank sat between them, kicking his heels on the chair leg. Can I have more cornbread? Say please, Ellie told him. Please, Mr. Jonas. The name landed heavy on the table. Jonas got real still. You can just call me Jonas, he said after a moment. Your mama's right to teach you manners. He reached over and put another piece of cornbread on Hank's plate. But we're family now, and family don't need to be so formal. Family. The word just hung there in the quiet room. Hank thought about this with the serious mind of a 5-year-old. Does that mean you're my paw now? Ellie held her breath. Jonas was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I reckon that's for you to decide, son. I'm not trying to take nobody's place. But if you wanted to call me that, I'd be mighty honored. Hank gave a solemn nod and went back to his dinner. But Ellie saw the tightness leave his little shoulders. For the first time since Walter ran off, her son looked like he was finally home. She had been searching for a place where her past couldn't find her. Instead, she had landed right in the middle of a war. And like it or not, she was a part of it now. On that quiet ranch, a fragile peace had settled. Every soul had a purpose. Jonas was up before the sun, tending to the horses and checking fence lines. Ezra ran the house and the kitchen. Young Ellie found her place mending clothes and reading the Bible to Hank. But the evenings were what mattered most. Gathered by the fire, Ezra would whittle and Hank would scratch out letters on a slate. Ellie would watch the firelight flicker across the scars on Jonas's face as he read aloud from an old book. He read slow and steady, his deep voice stumbling on the hard words. But he never gave up. One night, Ellie spoke softly. You could just read that to yourself, you know. Jonas looked up. I know, but Hank enjoys the stories. He paused for a moment. And I like having someone to read to. Did you read to Lily? The question escaped before Ellie could catch it. She saw the old pain tighten his face. I'm sorry, she whispered. I shouldn't have. His voice came out rough. Every single night, she would pick a book and I'd read her to sleep. Sometimes I kept on reading, just to watch her dream. She sounds like she was wonderful. Jonas closed the book with a gentle finality. She was. Had her mother's eyes, brown as a polished pecan, and a laugh. He shook his head, lost in the memory. Tell me about Martha, Ellie prompted. Jonas looked surprised. You want to hear about my dead wife? She was part of your life, Jonas, part of you. Ellie set her mending aside. I'm not trying to replace her. I just want to know who she was. He stared into the fire for a long time before he finally spoke. I was 22 when we met. She was the school teacher's daughter, the prettiest girl for 3 counties around. I never figured I had a chance. Just a ranch hand with calloused hands and dirt under his nails. Ellie finished the thought for him. A faint smile touched his lips. She said I was the only man who wasn't trying to put on a show for her, said I was honest and steady, a man she could build a life with. Sounds like a smart woman. Smarter than me, that's for sure, Jonas said, his gaze fixed on the flames. We were married 2 years when Lily was born. Those were good years. We didn't have much, but we had each other. And then the fire. And then the fire. His hands clenched into fists in his lap. It was a cold November, much like now. I was out in the south pasture with a sick horse. By the time I saw the smoke, He choked on the words. I ran, he finally managed. I ran faster than I've ever run, but the flames were everywhere. I could hear them screaming. Ellie reached out and took his hand. I tried to break the door down, he whispered. Threw myself against it until I felt my shoulder give way, but it was no use. I watched them burn, Ellie. I watched my girls burn, and I couldn't do a thing. His voice was raw. After the roof fell in, I went in anyway. That's how I got these scars. He looked at her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. Part of me wishes Ezra had just let me die in there. I'm glad he didn't, Wasi asked. Because I wouldn't have found you, she said, squeezing his hand. I needed someone who understood what it means to lose it all and just keep going. I'm not strong, Ellie. I'm just too stubborn to quit. That is strength, she said, pressing his scarred hand to her cheek. They sat like that for a long while, a silent understanding passing between them. It was not love, not yet. But it was a start. A week later, the weather cleared enough for a trip to town. You don't have to go, Jonas said, hitching the wagon. I want to, Ellie replied, adjusting her bonnet. I cannot hide out here forever. The folks in Silver Falls can be unkind. I have dealt with unkind people before, she said, climbing onto the wagon seat. Jonas studied her for a moment, then gave a slow nod. I'll go with you. You don't have to. I know, he said, taking the reins. I want to. Hank stayed behind with Ezra, who promised to teach the boy how to carve a whistle. Ellie felt a pang of worry watching her son wave from the porch. He'll be fine, Jonas said gently. Ezra would guard that boy with his life. The 3-hour ride was mostly quiet. Ellie noticed Jonas glancing over, just checking on her. It was a small kindness, but one her late husband had never offered. Silver Falls was a proper town, with a long main street, a church on one end, and a saloon on the other. And it seemed every person on the boardwalk stopped dead in their tracks to stare as Jonas Blackwood's wagon rolled down the street. They're all looking at us, Ellie murmured. They're looking at me, Jonas corrected, his jaw tight. They have long memories in this town. He pulled up in front of the general store. Stay close. The store was warm and smelled of flour and salt pork. A thin man with slicked back hair stood behind the counter, his eyes narrowing. Blackwood, he said, his tone sharp. Been a while? Pratt, Jonas acknowledged. I need my usual order of supplies. Pratt's oily gaze slid over to Ellie. And who is this? The mail-order bride we have been hearing so much about. Ellie lifted her chin. I am Mrs. Blackwood. So I hear, Pratt said with a smile that held no warmth. Welcome to Silver Falls. I do hope you find our town accommodating. Just then the door swung open with a gust of cold air, and a woman's sharp voice cut through the room. Vernon, I need more lamp oil. The last batch was... The voice trailed off. Ellie turned to see a woman of about 50, her graying hair in a tight bun, and her mouth set in a permanent frown. Her clothes were expensive, and she wore them like armor. Well, well, the woman said, her eyes locking onto Ellie. The Blackwood woman. I am Mrs. Wade. Jonas's voice was flat. This is my wife, Eleanor. Yes, the bride from Philadelphia, Mrs. Wade said, circling Ellie like a bird of prey. I have family there. Perhaps I know your people. Ellie's heart hammered against her ribs. I doubt it, ma'am. My family was not of high society. No, I suppose not, Mrs. Wade said, her eyes dropping pointedly to Ellie's swollen belly. Though congratulations are in order. The timing is a bit confusing, I must admit. You have been married, what, 2 weeks? And yet you are... The insult hung in the air, thick and ugly. The child is from my first marriage, Ellie said, her voice steady. I am a widow. Are you now? Mrs. Wade's smile was pure poison. How very convenient. Although I have heard rumors that your first husband is not quite as dead as you claim. The color drained from Ellie's face. Prudence, Jonas said, stepping between the two women. His voice was low and quiet. That is enough. I am just making conversation, Mr. Blackwood, Mrs. Wade chirped. She can speak for herself. She can, Jonas said, his voice dropping into a dangerous calm. But she does not have to answer to you, and neither do I. The tension in the store was thick enough to cut with a knife. Mrs. Wade finally broke the silence with the brittle laugh. Such fire, I had forgotten you had it in you. She gathered her fine skirts. Enjoy your supplies, Mr. Blackwood, and do give my regards to that ranch. My husband has always admired your land." With that, she swept out of the store, leaving a chill in her wake. "I'm sorry," Jonas said, his voice low. "I should have warned you about her." "Who is she?" "That's Prudence Wade. Her husband, Cornelius, is the county judge. He also owns the bank. They have been trying to get my land for years." "Why?" "Because it has the best water access in this whole valley. Whoever holds Blackwood Creek controls nearly every ranch around here." Jonas's jaw set hard. Cornelius made some generous offers. "I told him no every time, and he is not a man who takes no for an answer." As Jonas loaded the wagon, Ellie spoke up. She knew about Walter not being dead. In a small town, secrets do not keep. What if they tell everyone I lied? Jonas turned to her. "Then we will handle it together." "How can you be so calm about it?" "Because for 3 years this town has called me a murderer and a madman." He gently lifted her chin. "Their words only have power if you give it to them. And you are a whole lot stronger than you think, Ellie Blackwood." "I do not feel strong. Nobody ever does when the storm is raging. Strength is what you find after it passes." He helped her onto the wagon. "Come on, let's get you home." Home. That word echoed in her mind, but for the first time it felt warm. It felt right. That night, Ellie woke up to the sound of screaming. Her heart pounded in her chest. The awful sounds were not coming from her son, Hank. They were coming from Jonas's room. She grabbed her shawl and rushed down the dark hallway. Lamplight was leaking from under his door. She pushed the door open to find him thrashing in his bed, tangled in sheets soaked with sweat. "Martha!" he cried out. "Lily, no! Jonas!" Ellie rushed to his bedside. "Jonas, you need to wake up." His hand shot out and grabbed her wrist with startling force. His eyes were wide open but saw nothing, trapped in a terrible nightmare. "It is me," Ellie said softly, not even trying to pull away. "It is just Ellie. You are safe now. You are home." His eyes slowly began to focus. His grip went slack. "Ellie," his voice was raw with pain. "I was dreaming. I know. The fire." He sat up, running his hands through his hair. "I was back in the fire. I could smell it. I could hear them." He stopped, his chest heaving. Without a second thought, Ellie pulled him into an embrace. He was stiff for a moment, this big, scarred man. Then he just broke, collapsing against her shoulder, his body shaking with quiet sobs. "I could not save them," he whispered. "I tried so hard. I swear I tried." "I know," she said, stroking his hair just like she did for Hank after a bad dream. "I know you did. Every single night, I go back to that fire. And every single night, I fail them again." "It was not your fault." "It was," he said, pulling back to look at her. "The man who hired Silas Crawford, he did it because of me. Because I refused to sell this land." His voice cracked. "My pride is what killed my family, Ellie. My own stubbornness." "Stop it." She took his face in her hands, making him meet her eyes. "The man who set that fire is to blame. The man who paid him is to blame. You are a victim in this, Jonas Blackwood, not the villain. You do not understand." "I understand more than you think," she said, holding his gaze. "I blame myself when Walter left. I thought I was not pretty enough, not good enough to make him stay. That shame nearly tore me apart." "That is different." "Is it?" she asked. "Shame is shame. Guilt is guilt. And neither one does anybody any good. You can spend your whole life punishing yourself for something you could not stop. Or you can honor their memory by living your life, by building something new." "I do not know if I can do that." "Then let me help you," she whispered, pressing her forehead against his. "Let me help carry the weight. That is what family is for." They stayed that way for a long time. Then Jonas pulled back. "The baby," he said suddenly. "Is the baby all right?" "The baby is just fine." Ellie took his hand and placed it on her belly. "Feel that." Right on cue, the baby gave a strong kick against his palm. His eyes widened. "Was that?" "That was your child saying hello." The baby kicked again. And Jonas Blackwood, this broken and grieving man, finally smiled. "Hello," he whispered to her stomach. "Hello there, little one." Ellie felt tears welling up. This was not love, not yet. But it was a start. It felt like hope. The next morning, Ellie found Ezra in the kitchen. I heard all the noise last night, he said. The nightmares are getting worse, are they not? Ellie poured some coffee. How long has he had them? Since the fire. They come and go, but winter is always the worst time. He told me he killed the man, Silas Crawford. Ezra nodded. Did he tell you how he found him? He said he tracked him down. That is a polite way of putting it. Ezra's eyes were serious. Jonas did not track him, Mrs. Blackwood. He hunted him for 3 solid months. He followed every rumor, every whisper. He was a man possessed. He had to, because Crawford took his family from him. But Crawford was just the weapon, not the one aiming it. Ezra leaned in close. Jonas beat that man until he gave up the name of the person who paid him. Then he kept on beating him until the man stopped breathing. Ellie felt a chill run down her spine. The trial said it was self-defense. The trial said what the jury wanted to hear. Everyone knew what Crawford did. No one was going to see Jonas hang for it. But the truth is Jonas executed that man, and he has carried that with him ever since. Who paid him? Ellie asked. Did Crawford give a name? Ezra paused. Oh, he gave up a name, all right. A name that haunts Jonas more than any nightmare. Who was it? Cornelius Wade. Ellie nearly dropped her coffee cup. The judge? The same judge whose wife was so cruel to you? The same one who wants this land? Ezra's voice got low. Jonas cannot prove it. Crawford's confession died right along with him. But Jonas knows. He knows Wade is the reason Martha and Lily are gone. Then why has he not done something? Ellie trailed off as she understood. Because if he goes after a judge the way he went after Crawford, they will hang him for sure. Now you are starting to see it. Ezra stood up. Jonas is a patient man, Mrs. Blackwood. He has been waiting 3 years for Wade to make a mistake, to give him an opening. And all that time, Wade just keeps circling, looking for a way to take this land. Ezra walked to the door, then stopped. You asked me why Jonas needed a wife. I told you he was dying inside, and that is the truth. But there is another reason. What is that? A man who is all alone is an easy target. Easy to get rid of. Ezra's eyes met hers. But a man with a family, with a wife and a son, with another child on the way. Well, that man has witnesses. That man has folks who would ask questions if he just disappeared. That man is protected. The truth of it settled on Ellie like a heavy blanket. He married me for protection from Wade. He married you because he wanted a family, Ezra said, his tone softening. But yes, you being here makes it harder for Wade to make a move. That is just a practical fact. Does Jonas know you are telling me all this? Jonas knows I tell people what they need to know. Ezra opened the door, letting a cold wind rush in. And right now, you need to know exactly what kind of trouble you have married into. Because the storm that is coming, it is not the kind that just blows over. Ellie sat alone, her hand on her belly. She thought about Prudence Wade's cruel smile, about the fire, and about Jonas screaming in the dark, trapped with an enemy he could not touch. She had come here looking for safety. That afternoon, Hank came tearing into the house. Mama, come quick! She followed him out to the barn. Jonas was there with a young collie dog, its fur all matted and its ear torn up. Found her out in the woods, Jonas said, near starved. Must have been left behind by a wagon train. Can we keep her? Hank's eyes were as big as saucers. Please, Mama. Ellie looked at her son, this little boy who had already lost so much. Then she looked at Jonas, who was watching her with a hopeful look. What do you think? She asked him. I think every boy needs a dog. Jonas knelt down so Hank could pet the shaken animal. We'll call her Scout, if that's all right with you, Mama. Hank's voice was filled with hope. Can we? Ellie couldn't help but smile. Yes, baby, we can keep her. Hank let out a whoop of pure joy around Jonas's neck. And this man, who had lost nearly everything, held her boy as if he was the most precious thing left in the world. This is family, Ellie thought. Just broken pieces finding a way to fit together. It was not perfect or safe, but it was theirs, and she would fight to protect it. 3 weeks in, she stopped counting the days. Time on the Blackwood Creek Ranch was measured in small moments. The lingering touch of Jonas's hand, Hank's laughter in the barn, or the baby's stronger kicks each night. She was 7 months along, her belly so round she could hardly tie her own boots. Jonas had started helping, kneeling at her feet each morning with a gentleness that made her heart ache. You do not have to do that, as she told him. One morning, folks will say you are getting soft. Let them say what they want. He finished the lace and looked up at her. You are carrying my child. The least I can do is tie your shoes. My child. He said it so naturally now. Jonas, I need to tell you something. He stood reading the worry on her face. What is it? Ezra told me about Wade and what Crawford said. The warmth left Jonas's expression. He should not have. Maybe not, but I am your wife. We face things together. That is our job. Jonas let out a long breath, the tension leaving his shoulders. Wade has been circling this land for 10 years. Back when my father owned it, he tried to buy it 3 times. Pa always refused. After my folks passed on, I inherited the place. Martha and I were married, and we were going to build something that would last. But Wade could not let that happen. He wants to control the water rights. This creek feeds half the valley. If he owns this land, he can cut folks off or charge them whatever he wants. So he hired Crawford to burn me out. His voice went hard as stone. He just did not expect Martha and Lily to be home. Or maybe he did. Can you prove any of it? No, Crawford is dead and Wade is too smart to leave a trail. That is why I have been waiting 3 years, hoping he would make a mistake. He turned and took her hands. Ellie, you have to understand, Wade is dangerous because he is patient. He will wait for years to get what he wants. And now that you and Hank are here, he will use you against me. How? I do not know yet, but he will find a way. He pressed his forehead to hers. I should have told you everything before you agreed to marry me. It would not have changed my mind, Ellie said, looking him straight in the eye. I came here with nothing, Jonas. No money, no choices. You gave my son a father and this baby a home. You gave us safety. Safety? His laugh was bitter. The man who murdered my family wants to take everything I have left. This is not safety, Ellie. This is a death sentence I dragged you into. Then we will face it together. She took his hand and placed it on her belly. Feel that? That is our daughter. I will be damned if I let Cornelius Wade take our future from us. Jonas just stared at her. You are not scared. I am terrified, she said with a small smile. But being scared is all I have ever known. What is new is having someone to stand beside me. He kissed her then, not carefully, but with a deep desperation and hope. When they parted, he rested his forehead on hers. I do not deserve you, he whispered. Probably not, she said, her eyes full of light, but you are stuck with me now. The trouble started 2 days later. Jonas was out checking cattle, leaving Ezra to watch the house. Ellie was teaching Hank his letters when the dog began to bark with a fierce urgency that got Ezra on his feet. Stay here, he said, grabbing the rifle from beside the door. A moment later, the door swung open. Ezra stood there, his face grim. You have got visitors. Before he could say more, a man pushed past him. He was young, with the soft hands and expensive clothes of a man who never worked. He smelled of whiskey. So you are the mail-order bride, he sneered, looking her over. The one who trapped Jonas Blackwood. Marcus, Ezra's voice was a low warning. You are not welcome here. I go where I please, old man. Marcus Wade circled the table like a predator. My mother told me about you, the pregnant widow from Philadelphia. Except you are not really a widow, are you? Ellie pulled Hank closer. I think you should leave. I will stay. My father has been interested in this ranch for years. Now Jonas has a wife with secrets. Well, that gives us leverage. We know things about you, Mrs. Blackwood, things that could make your life very uncomfortable. You do not know anything. Do I not? He moved closer, his breath foul. I know your husband is not dead. I know you have been living a lie. Marcus reached out and brushed her cheek. Such a pretty thing. Ezra moved so fast she barely saw it. One moment Marcus was touching her. The next he was flat on the floor with Ezra's boot on his chest and the rifle barrel at his throat. You ever touch her again, Ezra said quietly, and I will put a hole clean through your neck. Judge's son or not. You would not dare. Try me, boy. The arrogance in Marcus's face turned to real fear. He had made a terrible mistake. Get off of me! Ezra pressed the barrel harder. You will get on your horse, ride back to town, and tell your father that the Blackwoods are not interested in his schemes. My father will hear about this. I am counting on it. Ezra stepped away. Tell him something else. Tell him Jonas Blackwood has a long memory, and so do his friends. Marcus scrambled up and fled. Ellie watched him gallop away. Her hands were shaking. She had been holding Hank so tight he could not breathe. Mama, he whispered. Who was that man? Nobody, sweetheart. She loosened her grip. Just someone who was lost. She looked at Ezra, who was still staring down the road. Thank you. Do not thank me yet, he said, his face troubled. This has just begun. That boy is going to run straight to his daddy, and Wade don't like people threatening his kin. What now? Now we wait for Jonas. Ezra put the rifle down with a heavy sigh, and we pray I didn't just start a war. Jonas got back as the sun was setting. His face went dark as Ezra told him what happened. He touched her, just her face. I stopped him before he did more. Jonas's voice was flat and cold. He came into my house. He threatened my wife. He put his hands on her. Jonas, Ellie went to him. I'm fine. Ezra took care of it. Ezra shouldn't have had to. I should have been here. You can't be everywhere. I can damn well try. He paced the room like a caged wolf, balling and unballing his fists. This is how Wade works. He sends his boy to do the dirty work, knowing I can't touch him without the law getting involved. What are you going to do? Jonas stopped moving. The look in his eyes sent a chill right through her. Jonas, she grabbed his arm. Don't. Ellie, he threatened you. He threatened our child. If you go after him, you'll swing. Is that what you want for our boy, Hank? To grow up with no father? For me to raise this new baby all alone? Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. She saw the fury drain from his face, leaving only a hollow despair. I can't do nothing, he whispered. Then be smart about it. She stepped in close, taking his hands. Be patient. You said Wade is dangerous because he can wait. So you have to outwait him. Don't give him the fight he's looking for. And what's that? He wants you to fly off the handle. He wants you to make a mistake he can twist against you. She touched his scarred cheek. Don't you let him win, Jonas. Not this way. He stood there like a statue for a long moment. Then his shoulders slumped in defeat. I don't know how, he admitted. I don't know how to fight a man I can't get my hands on. My whole life, if something came at me, I met it head on. I'm not built for waiting. Then let me help you. Ellie leaned her forehead against his chest. I've done nothing but be patient for years, just waiting for the right time. Surviving men who wanted to break my spirit. She looked up at him. We are stronger together. Remember, together. Jonas pulled her into his arms, mindful of her belly. I'm not sure I believe in God anymore, Ellie. But if he's up there, he surely sent you to me. I don't know what I'd do without you. You would survive. You always have. Surviving is not the same as living. He kissed her hair. You taught me that. Later that night, with Hank asleep and Ezra in his own cabin, they sat by the fire. Tell me about Walter, Jonas said softly. The real story this time. Ellie just stared into the flames. Why? Because I told you about Martha, about Lily, about the worst thing I ever did. He took her hand. I need to know all of you, Ellie. Even the parts that bring you shame. She was quiet for a good long while before she finally spoke. I met Walter when I was 18. He was handsome and charming and said everything a girl wants to hear. My father owed him a gambling debt, and Walter told P he'd clear the debt if he could have me. Your father didn't just give you away, he sold you. She gave a bitter smile. I truly thought I could make a good life out of it. I figured if I was the best wife a man could ask for, he would eventually come to love me. But he never did. He just grew to resent me. Did he ever raise a hand to you? No, Walter was not that kind of man. He was worse. Her eyes met Jonas's. He was just cold. He would ignore me for weeks at a time, then stumble home drunk, wanting things from me that a wife shouldn't have to give. When I found out I was pregnant with Hank, I prayed it would change him. It only made things worse. He got tired of me. He found a new woman, younger and prettier. The memory was an old wound, faded but not gone. He rode out 2 weeks before Hank was born. Just packed a bag and left. No note, no goodbye. The landlord coming for the rent was how I found out. His family, they pointed the finger at me, said I ran him off. They tried to claim that a woman who could not hold on to her husband was not fit to raise his son. Her voice grew hard, like stone. That is when I ran. I changed my name and told the world he was dead. It was the only way I could keep my boy safe. You lied to protect your own. I did what a mother had to do. She looked him straight in the eye. Does knowing that change how you feel about me? Jonas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, my own mother used to say that we are judged by our choices, not the situations we are forced into. You were cornered, Ellie. Cornered by a man who used you up and threw you out. The lies you told were not sins. They were what you needed to survive. Do you truly believe that? I believe you are the strongest woman I have ever known. He raised her hand and kissed it. I believe you walked through hellfire to protect that boy. And I believe that whatever is coming our way, we are going to face it together. Ellie felt the tears finally break free, tears she had held back for years. She let them fall, burying her face in his chest as Jonas held her. I am so scared, she confessed. I have been scared for so long, I do not even remember what safe feels like. I know. His arms held her tighter. But you are safe now, I give you my word. Life. What if you cannot keep that promise? Then I will die trying. He pulled back, gently wiping the tears from her cheeks. That is all any of us can do, Ellie. We try our best and pray it is enough. She kissed him, tasting the salt from her tears and the smoke from the fire, and something that felt like home. When they finally broke apart, Jonas put his hand on her belly. She is going to be a strong one, he said quietly, just like her mother. How do you know it is a girl? I do not. I just have a feeling. He smiled, and for the first time she had ever seen, the smile truly reached his eyes. Lily Martha Blackwood. That is what I want to name her, if you will have it. Ellie's breath caught in her throat. After your wife and daughter, after the family you lost, his gray eyes stayed on hers. They would have loved you, Ellie, both of them. I know they would have. Then yes, she placed her hand over his. Lily Martha Blackwood. It is a perfect name. Outside, the wind howled as the snow started to fall. But inside the little house, by the light of a dying fire, two souls, both a little broken, just held on to each other, daring to hope for a new day. They had no idea that tomorrow was bringing a storm that would try to tear their world apart. They didn't know Cornelius Wade had already set his final wicked plan in motion. They surely didn't know that by week's end, everything they'd fought for would be hanging by a thread. But that night, none of it mattered. They had each other, and sometimes that's more than enough. The blizzard hit without a lick of warning. Ellie woke to a screaming wind and a world gone white. The snow was coming down so thick you couldn't see the barn from the porch. Jonas was already pulling on his heavy coat. Stay inside, he told her, his voice low. Keep the fires going. I gotta check on the horses. They'll freeze solid in this. He gave her a quick kiss on the forehead. I'll be back. Don't you open this door for anyone. He was gone into the white fury before she could argue. Ellie went through the quiet house, stoking fires and checking the windows. Hank was still fast asleep. Scout, the dog, was curled up right at his feet. Ezra came out from his room, his old face etched with worry. This is a bad one, he said, peering out at the snow hammering the glass. Ain't seen a storm like this in a good long while. You think Jonas will be okay? He knows these mountains better than any man alive. He'll be fine. But the look in Ezra's eyes told a different tale. An hour crawled by, then two. The storm just got meaner. Hank woke up, scared and hungry, holding tight to Ellie's skirt. She made breakfast with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, trying to keep her voice steady for the boy. Where's Mr. Jonas? Hank asked. He's checking the horses, sweet boy. He'll be right back. The storm's so loud. I know, honey, but we're safe and warm in here. Another hour passed. The fire was getting low. When Ezra went to grab more wood from the back porch, she heard him curse. What is it? The barn door, he called back, his voice tight. It's wide open. Something ain't right. Before she could say a word, he was pulling his own coat on. Stay here, don't let the boy out. Ezra, wait! But the door slammed shut, leaving her alone with Hank in that howling wind. She tried to stay busy, telling Hank stories to keep his mind off things. But the fear in her chest just kept growing. Something was terribly wrong. "Mama," Hank said, tugging on her sleeve. "Scout's acting strange." The dog was at the front door, whining low and scratching at the wood. "She wants out," Hank whispered. "She can't go out in this, honey." But Scout kept on, pacing and whining until Ellie thought she'd lose her mind. Then she heard it. A faint voice carried on the wind. "Ellie!" She threw the door open. Ezra was there on the porch, holding up a barely conscious Jonas. Blood was streaming down Jonas's face from a nasty gash on his head. His clothes were soaked, and his skin was deathly pale. "Help me, Ezra." "Take me home," Ezra gasped. He fell, hit his head on a beam. Together they hauled Jonas inside. He was ice cold to the touch. His lips were blue and his breathing was weak and shallow. "Get blankets," Ezra ordered, "and get some water hot on the stove as much as you can." Fear gave way to action. Ellie tore off Jonas's wet clothes while Ezra fed the fire until it roared. She piled every blanket they owned on his shivering body. "Jonas," she said, cupping his face in her hands, "can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open. "The horses." "To hell with the horses," she cried, tears running down her cheeks. "You almost died out there." "Couldn't let 'em freeze," he whispered. "They're all we got." "You are all I have," she said, pressing her forehead against his. "Don't you ever scare me like that again. You hear me?" He tried to manage a smile, but his eyes were already drifting shut. "Yes, ma'am." Ellie sat with him all night, keeping him warm and praying harder than she ever had before. Ezra kept a silent watch with her. By morning, the blizzard was gone, and Jonas's fever had finally broken. He woke up and saw Ellie asleep in the chair next to him, her hand still holding his. "She ain't left your side for a minute," Ezra said quietly from the doorway. "How long was I out?" "Most of the night. You gave us a real scare, Jonas. Especially her." Jonas just looked at Ellie's sleeping face, at the dark circles under her eyes. This woman had come to him with nothing but a boy and a heart full of secrets, and she trusted him with it all. "I ain't worth all this trouble," he murmured. "That ain't for you to decide," Ezra said, stepping into the room. "There's something else. While you were out, I went back to the barn. I found this." Ezra held up a blackened can. "Kerosene, hidden up in the hayloft. Someone put it there, Jonas. Someone was fixing to burn us to the ground." The words hit Jonas like a fist. "It has to be Wade. The storm must have spooked him." Ezra's gaze was like flint. This ain't just about land anymore. He's trying to finish what he started 3 years ago. Jonas pushed himself up, hissing through the pain in his head. "Where's Hank?" "Still sleeping. We're all fine," Ezra said, gently pushing him back down. "But this changes things. Wade's getting desperate. That means he's gonna make a mistake. Or it means he's gonna get more dangerous," Jonas countered. Ellie stirred then, her eyes slowly opening. A wave of relief washed over her when she saw Jonas was awake. "You're all right." "Thanks to y'all," he said. She winced as she sat up. "Ezra found you, and you wouldn't let me die." Jonas took her hand. "Ezra told me what you did, staying up all night. What else was I gonna do?" "You could have rested," he said at his thumb, making circles on her skin. "You wore yourself out, especially in your condition." "My condition is just fine," she said, a small smile appearing. "Your daughter is just as stubborn as her daddy." A softness came into Jonas's eyes. "Lily," he whispered. Ellie placed his hand on her belly. "She's been kicking all night. I think she was worried about you too." Right on cue, the baby gave a little kick, and Jonas let out a weak but real laugh. "Well, you tell her I ain't going anywhere," he said. "Tell her I got too much to live for now." The next few days were tense. Jonas got his strength back slowly, getting more frustrated by the day. Ellie fussed over him constantly. "I ain't an invalid," he grumbled when she blocked him from going to the barn. "You nearly froze to death 3 days ago. You'll stay put till I say so." "Since when are you the one giving orders?" "Since you decided to nearly get yourself killed," she replied with her arms crossed. "You want to argue about it?" Jonas looked at this fierce, tired, pregnant woman who had crossed the country for him and slowly shook his head. "No, ma'am, I reckon I don't." But they both knew this couldn't last. Wade was out there planning his next move. On the fifth day, a rider appeared down the road. Ezra saw them first. He was reaching for his rifle before he realized the rider was too small to be a threat. "It's a woman," he said, squinting. Ellie came to the window. The woman was wrapped in a heavy cloak, her horse moving careful through the snow. As she got closer, Ellie recognized the stern face and expensive coat. "It's Prudence Wade." Jonas was on his feet in an instant, swaying just a little. What in the hell does she want? Only one way to find out. They met her on the porch. Prudence climbed off her horse and walked toward them, her usual pride gone, replaced by what looked an awful lot like fear. "Mrs. Blackwood?" she started, her voice shaky. "Mr. Blackwood, I have to talk to you." "I got nothing to say to a Wade," Jonas growled. Please, the words seemed to cause her pain. "I know what my husband is planning. I know what he has done, and I can't." She took a breath to steady herself. "May I come inside? What I have to say is not for anyone else to hear." Ellie and Jonas shared a look. The arrogance was gone, and all that was left was raw desperation. "5 minutes," Jonas said finally, "and this had better not be a trick." "It isn't. I swear on my children's lives." They sat her down in the main room. She sat on the very edge of the chair, ready to bolt. Ezra stood by, rifle in hand. Hank and the Tom scout, Asahan and a scout were sent upstairs. "Talk," Jonas ordered. Prudence twisted her hands in her lap. "My husband intends to foreclose on your ranch. He has been faking the bank records, piling up debts that you do not owe. By the end of this week, he will have the legal power to take this property. That is nothing new. He has been trying to steal this land for years. This is different." Prudence looked up, her eyes shining with tears. "This time, he is not just taking the land. He is taking everything. Your animals, your tools, your home." She took a breath. "And he is going to have you arrested. For what? Murder." The word landed in the quiet room like a stone. "He has paid a witness to lie, to say you murdered Silas Crawford in cold blood. Not in self-defense. Premeditated murder." The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. "That is a lie," Ellie said, her voice trembling with rage. "Of course it is a lie, but it will not matter. Cornelius owns the judge and the sheriff. By the time it goes to trial, Jonas will already be convicted and hanged. Prudence's control finally broke, and then my husband will get what he has always wanted." "Why are you telling us this?" Jonas asked, his voice low and dangerous. "You are his wife, because I am tired." The words spilled out of her. "I am tired of watching him ruin good people. I am tired of pretending he is not a monster. I am tired of being afraid of my own son, Marcus. He is becoming just like his father, maybe even worse." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Last month he beat his wife so bad she lost their baby, his own child." She looked directly at Ellie's pregnant belly. "When I saw you in town, so full of hope, I thought of the grandchild I will never get to hold. And I knew I could not be a part of this any longer. What do you want?" "I want to help you stop him." Prudence reached inside her cloak and pulled out a thick stack of papers. "These are bank records and letters. They are proof that Cornelius has been stealing from the town for years. It is enough to ruin him if you can get it to the right people." Jonas took the papers, his eyes widening as he read. "Where did you get these?" "From his study. He always thought I was too stupid to understand his business." Her smile was full of bitterness. "He is wrong about many things. Why not take these to the sheriff yourself?" "Because the sheriff is in my husband's pocket. Because I am a woman and no one would believe me. Because if he finds out I betrayed him, Marcus will—" She trailed off, not needing to finish. Ellie knelt beside the older woman and took her hands. "Thank you. I know what this must have cost you." "No, you do not." Prudence's voice was empty. "But you will soon. Cornelius is having a Christmas Eve party tomorrow. The territorial governor will be there. If you can get these papers directly to the governor, it might work." "I will do it," Ellie declared. Jonas's head whipped around to face her. "No, absolutely not. You are 8 months pregnant. You are not walking into that den of snakes. But you cannot go. Wade wants you behind bars. The second you step foot in town, he will have you in chains." Ellie stood up straight, her chin high. "That means I am The only one who can do this. Ellie, she is right. Ezra's calm voice cut in. Wade will not see a pregnant woman at a party as a threat. She will be invisible. She can get closer to the governor than any of us. And if something goes wrong, if Wade figures it out, then I will handle it. Ellie met her husband's gaze. Jonas, I have spent my entire life running from men like him. For once, I want to run toward the fight. For our family. For our future. Jonas stared at her, then turned to Prudence. If any harm comes to her, I will protect her. Prudence stood, pulling her cloak tight around her. I will make sure she gets to the governor. It is the least I can do. It is not enough, I know. She walked to the door, then stopped. Mr. Blackwood, I know you have no reason to trust me. I have been a part of the evil that has tried to break you. But I meant what I said. I am tired, I said. I am tired of standing by while evil happens. She looked at him. A person's path to redemption can start with one single choice. This choice is mine. She turned and walked away, vanishing into the falling snow. That night, Ellie and Jonas lay together, her back against his chest, his arms around her belly. I do not want you going, he whispered into her hair. I know, but nothing is going to happen to me or to the baby. She turned to face him. Jonas, you have been fighting this war by yourself for 3 long years. Let me fight with you. Let me be your partner. You are everything to me. You are my heart. If I lost you, his voice broke. I cannot bury another family, Ellie. I am not strong enough for that. You are the strongest man I know. No, I am not. I am a broken, scared man who is barely hanging on. He touched his forehead to hers. You are what is holding me together. You, Hank, and this child. Without you all, I am nothing. Then you have to trust me. She kissed him gently. Trust that I know what I am doing. Trust that I will come home to you. And if you do not, he whispered, then you raise our children. You tell them stories about their mother. But you live, Jonas. That is all I ask of you. No matter what happens, you live. He kissed her then, a deep and desperate kiss that tasted of fear, and a love so strong it hurt. I love you, he breathed against her lips. I should have said it sooner. I know. She smiled through her own tears. I love you too. They just held each other all night long, neither one sleeping, each memorizing the feeling of the other's heart beating. Outside, the snow fell, blanketing the world in a quiet white. The next day would bring the fight of their lives. But for that night, they had the warmth of a family built from broken pieces. It had to be enough. Morning came far too soon. Ellie put on her best dress, the green wool one Jonas liked so much. While Ezra readied the wagon, Hank stood in the doorway, his little face creased with worry. Mama, where are you headed? To a party, sweetheart. She knelt and pulled him into a hug. I will be back before you know it. Promise, I promise. She kissed his forehead. Now you be good for Mr. Jonas and Ezra, you hear? And take care of Scout. I will. He squeezed her neck. I love you, Mama. I love you more than anything in this whole world, baby. Jonas helped her onto the wagon, his hands holding hers for a moment too long. The papers are in your bag, he said, his voice low. Prudence will be waiting for you at the edge of town. She will get you inside the party. I know. If anything feels the slightest bit wrong, you leave. You do not try to be a hero. I will be careful. He gripped her hands. Ellie, come back to me. Always. She leaned down to give him one last kiss. Always. Then she was gone. The wagon rolled down the snowy road, leaving Jonas standing alone in the yard with a prayer caught in his throat. Ezra came and stood beside him. She is a strong woman, the old man said. I know. She has to make it. Jonas watched until the wagon was just a tiny dot. Because if she does not, I am going after Wade myself, and this time I will not stop until one of us is in the ground. Ezra, I mean it. His eyes were as hard and cold as winter ice. If he lays a hand on her, if he so much as touches her, I will burn his entire world to ash, to hell with the law, and to hell with what comes after. He will pay for every single thing he took from me. Ezra was quiet for a time, then he just nodded. Let us pray it does not come to that then. But as they walked back to the house, both men felt that prayer was not going to be enough. A storm was coming, and it was going to end that night, one way or another. The Wade mansion was a blaze of light against the dark, snowy night. Ellie sat in the wagon, her heart hammering against her ribs. She could see the fancy carriages arriving, the wealthy guests heading through the big front doors. The sound of music and laughing carried on the wind. Somewhere in that house was the territorial governor. Inside was her only chance to save them all. "You are shaking." Prudence Wade appeared next to the wagon, wrapped in a dark cloak. Her face was pale, but her eyes were steady. "I am fine," Ellie lied. "You are scared to death." "Good. Fear will keep you alert." Prudence helped her down. "The governor got here an hour ago. He is in the main parlor with my husband. I will make a scene. When Cornelius leaves the room, you go right up to the governor." "What kind of scene?" "You let me worry about that." Prudence's smile was cold. "I have played the part of the perfect wife for 30 years. I know exactly how to get my husband's attention." They slipped in through a side door. Prudence led Ellie through servants' hallways, past a kitchen filled with more expensive things than Ellie had ever owned. "Stay right here," Prudence whispered, tucking her into a curtained alcove. "When you hear shouting, you move to the parlor. The governor is the older man with the silver beard." "Prudence!" Ellie grabbed her arm. "Thank you." "Do not thank me yet," the older woman said, her eyes shining. "We have not won." And then she was gone, melting into the crowd. Ellie was left alone with the hidden papers and a cold knot of fear in her stomach. The baby gave a hard kick. "Not now," Ellie whispered, pressing a hand to her belly. "Please, not now." The minutes felt like hours. She could hear the party, the clinking of glasses and the buzz of conversation. Every sound made her jump. Every shadow looked like a threat. Then she heard it. Prudence's voice, sharp and clear above the party noise. "Cornelius! Cornelius! You must come quickly. Marcus has gotten into the wine cellar again." She heard footsteps and a man cursing. Ellie moved. The parlor was smaller than she imagined. A fire roared in the fireplace, and a few men stood near it with cigars. She saw the governor right away. He had the silver beard and the territorial seal on his jacket. He looked over as she walked toward him. "Good evening, ma'am. I do not believe we have met." "Governor Harrison." Her voice was surprisingly steady. "My name is Eleanor Blackwood. I have some information about Judge Cornelius Wade that you need to see immediately." The other men looked at each other. The sheriff, she realized with a sudden chill, took a step toward the door. "Mrs. Blackwood," the governor said cautiously, "this is not the time or the place for accusations. Please, sir, just look at these papers." She pulled the documents from her bag. Bank statements showing he stole from the town. Letters proving Judge Wade hired the men who killed Jonas Blackwood's wife and child. Proof of that is quite enough. The voice behind her was smooth and cold as ice. Ellie turned. Cornelius Wade stood in the doorway. His face was a perfect picture of surprise, but his eyes were not smiling at all. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said, "what a very unexpected pleasure." Judge Wade came into the room and the sheriff moved aside for him. "I do not believe you were invited to our meeting." Ellie lifted her chin. "Some things are too important to wait for an invitation." "Indeed," Wade said, his eyes falling to the papers she held. "And what are those?" "Evidence of your crimes." Wade let out a rich, practiced laugh. "Governor, you must forgive this poor woman. She is new here from back east and married to a known criminal. I fear the ranch life has weakened her mind." "My mind is perfectly fine," Ellie said, holding out the documents. "Governor, please, just read them." Harrison hesitated, looking from Ellie to Wade. "The judge is a respected man," the governor said slowly. "These are heavy accusations." "They are also true." "Oui." Ellie's voice cracked. 3 years ago, Judge Wade paid Silas Crawford to burn down the Blackwood Creek Ranch. Jonas Blackwood's wife and daughter died in that fire. He has been trying to take Jonas's land ever since. Now he plans to have Jonas arrested for a murder he did not commit. "Lies," Wade snapped, his polite mask falling away. "All of it. Lies spread by a woman who does not understand the trouble she is in." "Then you will not mind if the governor looks at the evidence." Wade's eyes narrowed. "Those papers were stolen from my private study. My own wife, who has clearly lost her senses, took them. Prudence gave them to me. She is tired of you destroying innocent lives." "Prudence is a foolish woman who needs to learn her place," Wade said, stepping toward Ellie. "Just like you, Mrs. Blackwood. You should have stayed on that ranch with your outlaw husband. Instead, you came into my home to accuse me, because you are guilty. I am a judge, a banker, a pillar of this town, he whispered so only she could hear. And you are a pregnant woman who tricked her way into a man's bed. Who do you reckon they will believe? The baby kicked hard, sending a sharp pain through Ellie. Not now, she prayed. Governor Harrison, she said through clenched teeth, I am begging you, read the documents. If I am wrong, you can send me away. But if I am right. Harrison reached for the papers, but Wade moved faster. He grabbed Ellie's wrist, twisting it until she cried out. The documents fell and scattered on the floor. You foolish girl, he snarled. Did you truly think you could destroy everything I have built? Let her go, the governor ordered, his voice suddenly hard. Cornelius, this is not proper. This woman is trespassing. She is making false accusations. The door flew open. Jonas Blackwood stood there with snow in his hair and fire in his eyes. Get your hands off my wife. The room exploded. Wade let Ellie go and stumbled back. The sheriff pulled his pistol, but stopped when he saw the rifle in Jonas's hands. The other men backed against the walls. Jonas, Ellie whispered. How did you... Ezra followed you. He came and got me. Are you hurt? Jonas never took his eyes off Wade. I am fine, the baby. Another pain shot through her, and she bent over. It is all right, Jonas said. Ellie, the documents. Governor Harrison was already on his knees gathering the papers. His face grew whiter with every page. Cornelius, the governor said, his voice like ice. These bank records, this letter, they are forgeries. That woman made them to frame me. This letter is in your own hand. I know your writing, Harrison said, holding up a page. You wrote to Crawford 3 weeks before the fire. You offered him $200 to remove the obstacle at Blackwood Creek. It is signed with your name and sealed with your ring. Harrison stood. Sheriff Barnes, I am ordering you to arrest Judge Wade. On what charges? Wade yelled. You cannot do this. I am a judge. Not anymore, Harrison said, his eyes cold. Arson, conspiracy to murder, embezzlement, fraud. Take him away. You will regret this, Wade said as the sheriff moved toward him. All of you. I have powerful friends. You have nothing, Jonas said, his rifle still aimed. Your friends are gone. Your power is gone. Everything you built on my family's blood is over. Your family got what they deserved, Wade spat. Your wife was a common woman, and your daughter was nothing, and you are just a killer trying to act respectable. Jonas's finger tightened on the trigger. Jonas, don't! Ellie's voice cut through his rage. He looked at her, his eyes wild with pain. He killed them, his voice broke. He killed Martha and Lily. I know, she said softly, but killing him will not bring them back. Do not become what he is. Let the law handle him. Back, Ellie's trembling hand reached for him. Our daughter needs you. I need you. For a long moment, Jonas stood like a statue. Then he slowly lowered the rifle. Take him, he told the sheriff. Get him out of my sight. As they hauled the cursing judge away, Jonas rushed to Ellie, catching her as she fell. The baby, she gasped. Something is wrong. The pain started when I arrived. They are worse now. We need a doctor, Jonas yelled. There is no time, Prudence said from the doorway. That baby is coming right now. The governor pointed upstairs. Use the guest room. He asked her, can you deliver a baby? Prudence nodded. I have had 3 of my own. Prudence and Jonas helped Ellie upstairs. The hours that followed were a blur of pain. Ellie was on a strange bed, her body feeling like it was being torn apart. The pains grew closer and stronger, leaving her breathless. You are doing a fine job, Prudence said calmly. The baby is almost here. Jonas, I am scared, Ellie cried, reaching for him. He grabbed her hand tight. I am right here. Nothing is going to go wrong. You are the strongest woman I have ever known. You can do this. It hurts so much, she gasped. I know. Tell me about the ranch, she pleaded. Tell me about springtime. He knew she needed something to focus on besides the pain. He spoke softly. Into spring, the creek runs high and the meadows turn green with wildflowers. Hank and I will plant the garden, and Scout will chase butterflies. And Lily will be in your arms, healthy and beautiful like her mama. We will watch her grow up strong and free. Ellie, We will give her everything. A powerful pain hit, and Ellie screamed. Push, Prudence commanded. Ellie gave it everything she had. Then a tiny, perfect cry filled the room. It is a girl, Prudence said, her voice full of emotion. A beautiful little girl. Jonas made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Let me see her, Ellie whispered through her own tears. Please. Prudence placed the baby in her arms. She was so small, with a full head of dark hair. Hello, Lily, Ellie whispered, kissing her forehead. Jonas wrapped his arms around them, his tears falling. She is perfect. Lily Martha Blackwood, Ellie said. Is that still her name? It is the only thing I have ever been sure of, he answered, touching the baby's cheek. For a long time, the three of them just stayed there, a new family. Outside, the snow stopped and the sun rose on Christmas morning. The fear and the running were finally over. 3 weeks later, the trial of Cornelius Wade began. The evidence against him was solid. The governor testified, and bankers confirmed the theft. In a surprising turn, Marcus Wade testified against his own father. He is not the man any of us thought he was, Marcus said. Wade was found guilty on all charges and sent to prison for life. Ellie watched with Lily in her arms and Jonas by her side, holding Hank's hand. Jonas showed no emotion when the verdict was read. But outside he stopped. What is it? Ellie asked. I thought I would feel different, he said. I figured the anger would just disappear. Does it? She asked softly. He looked at his family for a long time. It is fading, he said at last. The anger is still there, but it is not so loud now. His eyes softened. You, Hank, and Lily did that. You gave me something stronger than ghosts, a future. They returned to the ranch that afternoon as the snow was starting to melt. The first signs of spring were everywhere. Ezra met them on the porch, grinning. About time you all got home. It has been too quiet. Jonas clapped his shoulder. We have a visitor, Ezra said. A young woman stepped out, thin and pale, but with determined eyes. Mrs. Blackwood, she said, I am Sarah Wade, Marcus's wife. Ellie knew the terrible story. What brings you here? She asked gently. Marcus left town after the trial, Sarah said, her voice shaking. I have nowhere to go. The elder Mrs. Wade said you might have work for me. Ellie looked at Jonas, who gave a slight nod. You can stay as long as you need, Ellie told her. We have plenty of room. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. Do not thank me, Ellie said, taking her hand. Just promise me you will heal. Do not let this define you. I know it is hard to start over, but it can be done. I am living proof of that. That evening, they all sat around the table. It was a full table. Ellie and Jonas, Hank and Ezra, Sarah and the baby. It was noisy and crowded, and it was perfect. Jonas stood and raised his glass. A year ago, I was a man who had given up on everything. Then I got a letter from a woman in Philadelphia who was running from her own past. He looked right at Ellie. That letter saved my life. It did not just bring me a wife and children. It showed me that broken people can build something beautiful together. Pain does not have to be the final chapter. He raised his glass. To family, the one you are born with, and the one you make. To family, everyone repeated. Ellie raised her glass, tears on her cheeks. Home, she thought. It was not a place, but these people. This love. Later that night, Ellie stood by the window holding Lily. Jonas came up behind her, wrapping his arms around them both. What are you thinking about? He asked. About the woman I was when I first came here, she said, leaning against him. She was so afraid. Now I understand something. Courage is not about being fearless. It is about being afraid and moving forward anyway. It is choosing hope. You are the bravest person I know, he said. I was just a woman who got lucky, she smiled. I found a good man who saw the truth in me and loved me anyway, model. Jonas gently cupped her face with his work-worn hands. It was never about your lies. I fell in love with your truth. The truth I saw in your letters. The fight I see in your eyes when you protect your own. He spoke softly, his gray eyes looking right into hers. I have been fumbling for these words since we met, and now I finally have them. He brushed a kiss across her forehead. You are so much more than my wife, Ellie Blackwood. You are more than the mother of my children. You are my heart and my home. You are the reason I greet the sunrise and the peace I feel at sunset. Lily stirred between them with a little sigh of happiness. I love you, Jonas whispered. Always, Ellie answered. Outside, the Wyoming stars burned bright, and the creek sang its endless song. Inside a house built on hope, a family held each other and dreamed of all their tomorrows. They had walked through fire. To find this peace, they faced down loss and betrayal, fear and doubt. They weathered storms that should have broken them, but they did more than just survive. They had overcome it all. As the night grew still, Ellie Blackwood understood the one truth that mattered. Love was not a perfect fairy tale. It was a choice you had to make every single day. A choice to be there for each other, to fight for one another, and to believe when belief seemed impossible. And she had made her choice. She had chosen this man, this family. She had chosen home. Thank you kindly for sitting with me by the fire tonight. Sharing the story of Ellie and Jonas has been a true honor. If their journey touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel for more tales of grit and second chances in the Old West. And before you go, leave a comment telling me your favorite part of their story. I promise you, I read every single one.